Intercourse by Andrea Dworkin. Part 3: Power, Status, and Hate. Dirt and Death, Chapter 9. Inferiority is not banal or incidental, even when it happens to women. It is not a petty affliction like bad skin or circles under the eyes. It is not a superficial flaw in an otherwise perfect picture. It is not a minor irritation, nor is it a trivial inconvenience, an occasional aggravation, or a regrettable but frankly harmless lapse in manners. It is not a point of view that some people with soft skin find offensive. It is the deep and destructive devaluing of a person in life, a shredding of dignity and self respect, an imposed exile from human worth and human recognition, the forced alienation of a person from even the possibility of wholeness or internal integrity. Inferiority puts rightful self love beyond reach, a dream fragmented by insult into a perpetually recurring nightmare. Inferiority creates a person broken and humiliated inside. The fragments, scattered pieces, and sharp slivers of someone who can never be made whole, are then taken to be the standard of what is normal in her kind. Women are like that. The insult that hurt her, inferiority as an assault, ongoing since birth, is seen as a consequence, not the cause, of her so called nature, an inferior nature. In English, a graceful language, she is even called a piece. It is likely to be her personal experience that she is insufficiently loved. Her subjectivity itself is second classed, her experiences and perceptions inferior in the world as she is inferior in the world. Her experience is recast into a psychologically pejorative judgment. She is never loved enough because she is needy, neurotic, the insufficiency of the love she feels being in and of itself evidence of a deep seated and natural dependency. Her personal experiences or perceptions are never credited as having a hard core of reality to them. She is, however, never loved enough. In truth, in point of fact, objectively, she is never loved enough. As Conrad Lorenz wrote, quote, I doubt if it is possible to feel real affection for anybody who is in every respect one's inferior. End quote. There are so many dirty names for her that one rarely learns them all, even in one's native tongue. There are dirty names for every female part of her body, and for every way of touching her. There are dirty words, dirty laughs, dirty noises, dirty jokes, dirty movies, and dirty things to do to her in the dark. Fucking her is the dirtiest, though it may not be as dirty as she herself is. Her genitals are dirty in the literal meaning, stink and blood and urine and mucus and slime. Her genitals are also dirty in the metaphoric sense, obscene. She is reviled as filthy, obscene, in religion, pornography, philosophy, and in most literature and art and psychology. Where she is not explicitly maligned, she is magnificently condescended to, as in this diary entry by Somerset Maugham, written when he was in medical school. Quote, the professor of gynecology. He began his course of lectures as follows. Gentlemen, woman is an animal that micturates once a day, defecates once a week, menstruates once a month, pure parturiates once a year, and copulates whenever she has the opportunity. I thought it was a prettily balanced sentence. End quote. Were she loved sufficiently, or even enough, she could not be despised so much. Were she sexually loved, or even liked, she and what is done with her or to her, in the dark or in the light, would not, could not, exist rooted in the realm of dirt, the contempt for her apparently absolute and irrevocable, horrible, immovable. Help us, Lord, unjust. She is not just lest. She and the sex she incarnates are a species of filth. God will not help, of course. Quote, for a whore is a deep ditch, and a strange woman is a narrow pit. End quote. Proverbs 23:27. This dirt, in which women are buried alive, is not a matter of attitude. It is not in the eye of the beholder. There is a woman. She lives in a world, this world, in which power is real. Men have it, generally speaking. She does not because she is a woman. She is devalued not only in people's thoughts, but in the way she is treated. By individuals because she is not their equal, by institutions of society, law, religion, art, education. She is poorer than men in money and in rights. She is poorer in the freedoms she can actually exercise, including freedom of movement and freedom of speech. She must dress in ways that distinguish her on sight from those who have power. Her behavior must be categorically different from the behavior of those in power. She is segregated in the job market and often in social life, but sexual intimacy is forced on her. Individuals rarely escape forced sex in a lifetime. The dirt she is buried alive in is real because the power that devalues her is real. The ways in which she is devalued are concrete, material, real. Sexual, economic, physical, social. They happen to her, not as a disembodied spirit, but as a corporeal being, flesh and blood. Inferiority is done to her. It is real, and she is real. Attitudes do not establish her lower status. Institutions and practices do. Nice attitudes toward her, as an individual, while perhaps a welcome respite, do not change her status. That status is established by a distribution of power that excludes her from both equality and self determination because she is a woman. Because she is a woman, she is impoverished, poor in power, poor in worth. Being dirty, is one dimension of her worthlessness, the mark of a base inferiority. The devaluing of her is intense, committed, obscene, organized spleen, emotional, often brutal and enraged. She is an object of hate, an impersonal collective hate directed against her kind, including her as an individual, but insensible to her individuality. Hated and inferior, she is dirty. Hate is not an attitude or an opinion. Hate is a passion, the fuel of murder and terrorism. There is slow murder in which terror and assault are mixed, rape, battery, prostitution, incest. There is fast murder, sex murder, killing her then fucking her, serial murder or sadistic murder. Changes of attitude or opinion do not change systems of power fueled by hate. The dirty words themselves are not a superficial phenomenon. Their meaning, changed easily by an infusion of liberal goodwill on the part of those who use them. Power, in this case power fueled by hate, also determines the meaning of language. The dirty words retain their obscene meaning because that is the low value put on what they name. There have been radical efforts to change the malignant words that take on an innocent or benign meaning. In Paradise Now, the living theater, in scenarios invoking a revolutionary desire for a freedom outside the domain of humiliation or violence, chanted, quote, fuck the Jews, fuck the Arabs, fuck means peace, end quote. Even with the consent of the flower child generation to the revision of meaning, the meaning of fuck did not change. D.H. Lawrence tried to reinvent the use of so called obscene words. He believed that the use of sexual euphemism created the dirty connotation of the more direct language. Quote, if I use the taboo words, there is a reason. We shall never free the phallic reality from the uplift taint till we give it its own phallic language and use the obscene words, end quote. The phallic reality, he insisted, was ecstatic, not dirty, a sacrament of fucking, human worship of a pure masculinity and a pure femininity, in, respectively, the penis and the cunt, another word favored by Lawrence. Lawrence himself was forced to recognize, quote, how strong is the will in ordinary, vulgar people to do dirt on sex, end quote. Even regular working men, who he had idolized, quote, have a disgusting attitude towards sex, a disgusting contempt of it, a disgusting desire to insult it. If such fellows have intercourse with a woman, they triumphantly feel that they have done her dirt, and now she is lower, cheaper, more contemptible than she was before, end quote. Dirty words stay dirty because they express a contempt for women, and for women and sex, often synonyms, that is real, embedded in hostile practices that devalue and hurt women. As Lord Byron wrote in a letter, quote, I rather look upon love altogether as a sort of hostile transaction, end quote. Dirty words stay dirty because they express hate for women as inferiors. That hate is inextricably, it seems, part of sex, a hate for women's genitals, a hate for women's bodies, a hate for the insides of women touched in fucking. Dirty words stay dirty because they express a true dimension of women's inferiority, a forced inferiority, the dirty words part of the ongoing force, the penis itself signifying power over woman, that power expressed most directly, most eloquently, in fucking women. Lawrence's phallic reality meant power over, and his ordinary vulgar people had the same religion. Women stayed dirty because women stayed inferior. Lawrence wanted to reform an attitude and a vocabulary, but he wanted to keep the power relationship between men and women the same. Worshipping cunt and hating women were not, in real life, exactly distinguishable anyway. As Frida, Lawrence's own wife, battered, might have testified had she not valued his life, as he did, more than her own. Change requires a change in power relations, a redistribution of power, an equality of worth that is socially true. The meaning of words that express derision of inferiors does not change until or unless the hate and power they signify change. Current dogma is to teach by rote that sex is healthy, as if it existed outside social relations, as if it had no ties to anything mean or low down, to history, to power, to the dispossession of women from freedom. But for sex not to mean dirt, for sex not to be dirty, the status of women would have to change radically. There would have to be equality without equivocation or qualification. Social equality for all women, not personal exemptions from insult for some women in some circumstances. The next question, a real one and a fascinating one, then is, with women not dirty, with sex not dirty, could men fuck? To what extent does intercourse depend on the inferiority of women? Radically degraded people, men and women, are also devalued as dirt, experienced as deep down filthy, sexualized as dirty, desired as dirty for fucking and for genocide. Racist ideology spells out how the degraded race is filthy and intensely sexed, dirty and sensual, contaminating. Dirty provokes the sexual interest, the fuck itself, the sexual humiliation, the sexual exploitation, the sex murder of the racially despised. Inferiority, sex based or race based or both, seem to be the requisite context for fucking. James Baldwin reminds us, quote, when the loveless come to power, or when sexual despair comes to power, the sexuality of the object is either a threat or a fantasy. That most men will choose women to debase is not a matter of rejoicing either for the chosen woman or anybody else. Brutal truth, furthermore, forces the observation, particularly if one is a black man, that this choice is by no means certain. That men have an enormous need to debase other men, and only because they are men, is a truth with which history forbids us to labor. End quote. The sexual abuse and humiliation of racially despised women blends into the commonplace abuses of women as such inferior and dirty as women. When the acts of insult and injury are recognized as abuses, the reason is that the acts are seen to be assaults on the integrity of the racially despised men, attempts to unman them by taking their women. The abuses of women are not so much sexual crimes against the women in their own right as misappropriations of them, thefts filled with racist malice against the men to whom the women are supposed to belong. The sexualized hatred of racism appears to single out the man, focusing on him to destroy him, perhaps because to devalue a man as sexualized dirt at all is to unman him, feminize him, by giving him something real in common with women. Unmanning the man is a primary goal of racism, the institutionalized rapism of the continuing assault on his manhood, resembling nothing so much as prison rape, the only common form of man on man rape, as described in a study of Philadelphia prisons. Quote, a primary goal of the sexual aggressor, it is clear, is the conquest and degradation of his victim. We repeatedly found that aggressors used such language as quote unquote, fight or fuck, quote unquote, we're going to take your manhood, quote unquote, you'll have to give up some face, and quote unquote, we're going to make a girl out of you. Some of the assaults were reminiscent of the custom in some ancient societies of castrating or buggering a defeated enemy, end quote. The rape is literal in forced sex acts, castration, and murder. For instance, Jewish men were castrated in medical experiments in the concentration camps. Black men were castrated in terrorist attacks in the Deep South. There was a secret forced sex and open murder. The rape is also metaphoric, stripped of dignity and selfhood, invaded, culturally defamed, civilly inferior, powerless to advance his own honor, pornographized as if gangbanged and left to die. The racist program has unfailing ideological landmarks. The racially despised male is stigmatized as a sexual savage, a rapist by nature. As Hitler wrote, quote, with a satanic joy in his face, the black-haired Jewish youth lurks in wait for the unsuspecting girl whom he defiles with his blood, thus stealing her from her people. End quote. The race that is despised is physically filthy, as Hitler wrote. The cleanliness of this people, moral and otherwise, I must say, is a point in itself. By their very exterior, you could tell that these were no lovers of water, and to your distress, you often knew it with your eyes closed. Later, I often grew sick to my stomach from the smell of these caftan wearers. End quote. The racially despised men pollute the superior race, lowering it through misgeneration, as Hitler wrote. Quote, and so he tries systematically to lower the racial level by continuous poisoning of individuals, end quote. The influence of the racially inferior on the culture is pernicious, debasing, as Hitler wrote. Quote, was there any form of filth or profligacy, particularly in cultural life, without at least one Jew involved in it? If you cut even cautiously into such an abscess, you found, like a maggot in a rotting body, often dazzled by the sudden light, a K word. End quote. Shit. Okay. The charges against blacks in the United States follow the same form. The men are rapists of white women. They are physically dirty, having a racially specific stink. They want to destroy the white race through misgeneration. Miscegenation. That's the miscegenation. They are a cultural blight, involved in every vice in the American, with a K, pathology, genetically less intelligent, destroying language and public education. In the mass psychology of fascism, Wilhelm Reich comprehended that, quote, the Jew and the black man are not differentiated in the mind of the fascist, end quote. The swastika itself, he maintained, represented clearly, quote, two interlocking human figures, end quote, on its side, quote, a sexual act lying down, upright, end quote, upright, a sexual act in standing position, end quote. Therefore, quote, the swastika represents a basic living function, end quote. This recognition and its emotional impact, quote, does not account for the success of fascism's mass propaganda, but it certainly contributes to it. We can assume that this symbol depicting two interlocking figures acts as a powerful stimulus on deep layers of the organism, a stimulus that proves to be that much more powerful the more dissatisfied, the more burning with sexual desire a person is, end quote. The sexual meaning of the swastika can be traced back to ancient Indo-European cultures, in fact, used by contemporary sadomasochists when trying to dissociate their use of the swastika from its Nazi meaning, even when the point of the sex they are having is to inflict pain on a Jew. The humiliation rituals of racism are overtly sexual, even when not genital. In the concentration camps, the disintegration of human identity was accomplished by a harrowing assault on every aspect of the body's dignity. As Fania Fenelon wrote in Playing for Time, quote, I see us now, under the icy shower, arms pressed to our side, then back in the room again, demoralized, shivering, tattooed and hairless. It was odd, but that was the real humiliation, having no hair. End quote. The immersion in filth, including death by filth, an immersion in the scatological, an assault on any self-conception of human cleanliness and any possibility of being clean, was an integral part of the punishment for being inferior, for being filth. Quote, who could have dreamed up such a place as the latrine hut? It was an enormous hole dug out of the earth, about 40 feet deep, surrounded by an irregular border of large stones, plank walls, and a roof. This enormous funnel-shaped sewer was ringed with wooden bars. The sooner was the door opened than, breaking ranks, the girls rushed forward to sit on these bars, buttocks exposed. Some with dysentery didn't make it and relieved themselves where they stood, under the blows and insults of the latrine Blokova. Perched in this roost, about 50 girls were packed together like sick old hens, skeletal, shivering, clinging to their dung-stained bars. Those with long legs could touch the ground with the tips of their toes, but the others, the smaller ones like me, their legs dangling, had to grip the slippery round bar with both hands with all their might. To fall in the pit must have been a most terrible death. End quote. These concentration camps are emblematic of socially created conditions, artificial, vicious, in which racially degraded people are forced to live in racist societies of many descriptions. The Soweto shacks, urban ghettos in the United States, Palestinian refugee camps. The conditions imposed on the people are conditions of squalor, physical filth, a social reality embodying the degraded sexual reality of those devalued as dirt. Racially degraded women are especially targeted for sexual abuse and exploitation. That targeting is often systemic, the underbelly of societies that say that those women are racial dirt. They are found concentrated in brothels, on street corners, used in sex under slave conditions, prostituted on plantations or in the concentration camps, prostituted in prison camps or under prison conditions, prostituted to sexually service military enclaves, transient soldiers, or occupying armies. In some racist societies, sex with them is legally forbidden. This makes them especially appealing and at the same time invisible when they are sexually exploited in rape or prostitution. The dirt of race, added to the dirt of sex, makes them the most sexed creatures. They are, disproportionately to their numbers, forced, violated, bought, and sold. They have no legal or social remedy. In the prisons of Argentina, for instance, Jacobo Timmerman discovered that, quote, between 1974 and 1978, the violation of girls in clandestine prisons had a peculiar characteristic. Jewish girls were violated twice as often as non-Jewish girls, end quote. The rapes, in common with many racially based rapes, were held to be innocuous, but that logic led to this incomprehension was especially pernicious. Quote, there are no gas chambers in Argentina, and this leaves many with a clear conscience. End quote. Quote, I was never able to understand how the horrors of the Holocaust could diminish the significance of the violation of Jewish girls in clandestine Argentinian prisons. I was never able to accept how recalling and recording the activity of the Holocaust industry could render it seemingly unnecessary to confront openly the publication of anti-Semitic literature in Argentina, and the fact that such literature is studied in the Military Academy of Buenos Aires. End quote. Racially motivated rape is considerably protected by the misogyny that finds the rape of women, as such, no atrocity at all. The violation of a whole people gives the most irrefutable evidence of what is otherwise hidden. The rape and the racism combined and inflicted on a woman. With a mass murder atrocity, the rapes are drawn big in blood. The sadism in the rapes is unavoidable because the intention of the rapes, to destroy, is irrefutable. Rape cannot be explained away by personality. It is not an individual event or tragedy. The woman did not bring it on herself as a distinct personality or as a metaphysical slut. The greatest justifications for raping and prostituting women are not credible even to those who blame women for rape and prostitution. The racism of the sexual assault is clear because a people is being attacked. The presence of men massively in the carnage as victims is the proof. Once the rapes are, for the most part, gender specific, and on a smaller scale, the misogynist who embodies the normal mentality in a culture that accepts rape as normal for women, cannot see the rape at all. He is visually impaired. There's nothing big enough for him to see. He is hearing impaired. There are not enough screams. He cannot hear. The women in the clandestine prisons, Jews, or other racially degraded women in other places, are raped the way women often are by men who rape the way men rape. The bad motives of the men, their racist motives, are a matter for moral indignation, yes, but there is no atrocity. Atrocity, and rape, recognized as atrocity, is committed against a whole people, men too, unmanning the men, hurting them. Otherwise, rape does not count, not as torture, not as intolerable or unconscionable violation. The crimes against Timmerman were crimes, keeping him in jail with special insults and special malice because he was a Jew, terrorizing his family because he was a Jew, punishing him extra and worse because he began to fight as a newspaper editor for the disappeared in Argentina, and he was a Jew. The quote unquote girls were girls. None of the girls who were raped has brought a book to international attention. Not yet. The anti Semitism against him mattered when it did matter, and that was a fight, because he was a man. He existed, despite anti Semitism, recognizably as an individual. Women get raped anyway because they are women. All the same in that regard. The rape of a woman by a racist, excited and incensed by her race, is in the realm of ordinary sexual desire, the kind all men feel, part of a continuum of sexual desire, in which hostility always plays some part. The hostility is usually seen as innocuous, even when identifiable as racism. It is not distinct from normal kinds of sexual arousal. As Sartre wrote in Anti-Semite and Jew, quote, "In Berlin, I knew a Protestant in whom sexual desire took the form of indignation. The sight of women in bathing suits aroused him to fury. He willingly encouraged that fury and passed his time at swimming pools." The anti Semite is like that, and one of the elements of his hatred is profound sexual attraction toward Jews. End quote. In the so called voluntary situation of prostitution, Ida, a black woman in another country, knows that the white man come to Harlem, quote, because they want to do something dirty, and they knew that you knew how. All black people knew that, only the polite ones didn't say dirty, they said real. End quote. Women have no remedy. Men sometimes get revenge. Eldridge Cleaver mapped the territory in Soul on Ice. Quote, I became a rapist. To refine my technique and modus operandi, I started out by practicing on black girls in the ghetto. And when I considered myself smooth enough, I crossed the tracks and sought out the white prey. I did this consciously, deliberately, willfully, and methodically. Rape was an insurrectionary act. End quote. Sometimes, a more muted rebellion, less overtly violent, takes place in using white women as prostitutes, as Peary Thomas described in Down These Mean Streets. Quote, we got on a high and I asked my newfound amigo if he knew a cat house, a white cat house. I wanted to break out against this two-tone South. I wanted to fuck a white woman in Texas. End quote. Violent, or more superficially civil, the revenge was in fucking white women under the conditions most degrading, most debasing to women, rape and prostitution. The white women, elevated by race in Texas, were in the white cat house to fuck. The obliteration of being racially devalued is described by the man without a face in Abe's The Father of Another, or Abe's The Face of Another. Seeing the Harlem riots on television, he sees, quote, thousands of men and women like me without faces gathering together, end quote. He identifies with Harlem blacks, and he also identifies with Koreans who, in Japan, are often discriminated against, viewed as a lower race. The Koreans, having different faces, are treated as if they are faceless. Without consciously realizing it, he had come, quote, to have a feeling of closeness with them, end quote, because they were, quote, frequently the objects of prejudice, end quote. The dispossession of being faceless is likened to the racial devaluing of Koreans by the Japanese, long-time and hated imperialists in the Asian world. Inferiority is, in fact, dispossession. Having no face is the perfect emblem for that dispossession because it is a dispossession from individuality, identity, and belonging. The sexualization of what is left, once the face is taken away, destroys any identity the inferior person might have stubbornly retained. Justifying racial devaluation, keeping the racially devalued faceless, almost always involves the complicity of scientists, doctors, research scientists, who provided the biological facts on which distinctions of worth in race can be made. The body is sexualized, and in the body one finds the sexual evidence of a hierarchy of worth. Quote, the seminal odor of Orientals is stronger and more acrid than that of the Caucasian West, end quote, wrote Dr. Theodore Van de Velde in his scientific sex manual, Ideal Marriage. Quote, the semen of the healthy youths of Western European races has a fresh, exhilarating smell. In the mature man, it is more penetrating, end quote. The scientists, with their biologically based facts on race and sex, remove any legitimate sanctuary for pride in self, in the equality of self, that might somehow, in ways not yet understood, survive a potent system of inferiority. One is taught inferiority by learned men, by rapists, by sadists, by torturers, by murderers. At the center of the pedagogy is the fuck. Women qua women are the rightful victims of that pedagogy, the inevitable casualties of the fuck. Macho has made its way into common English. Prideful masculinity, the essence of virility, action and strength rooted in the sex of a man. Frida Kahlo, the great painter of primal female pain, used its female counterpart in language and in her paintings. According to her biographer, quote, indeed, the painting presents stereotypes, the macho and the chingada, her victim. Chingada, literally the screwed one, is Mexico's most familiar curse and a word used frequently by Frida. End quote. Octavio Paz is then quoted to explicate the meaning beyond any possible ambiguity or sentimentality. Quote, the verb chingar, to screw, denotes violence, an emergence from oneself to penetrate another by force. The verb is masculine, active, cruel. It stings, wounds, gashes, stains, and it provokes a bitter, resentful satisfaction. The person who suffers this action is passive, inert, and open, in contrast to the active, aggressive, and closed person who inflicts it. End quote. Kahlo, whose paintings are the most vivid renderings by any woman of the female, screwed, gashed, wounded, precisely the chingada, was married to Diego Rivera, considered Mexico's greatest modern painter. He painted socialist art, a brotherhood of dignity in work, a romance of the proletariat, epic murals of the working class. She painted what it was like being fucked by him. He himself said it. Quote, if I loved a woman, the more I loved her, the more I wanted to hurt her. Frida was only the most obvious victim of this disgusting trait. End quote. She painted the suffering, enraged. She created an iconography of the chingada that was resistance, not pornography. Knowing herself to be the screwed one, she made an art of passionate rebellion that shows the pain of inferiority delivered into your body, the violence of the contempt. Her rebellion, not in words, is less accessible than the capitulation of many female writers, exemplified by Marguerite Duras in The Lover, a novel about a female child and her adult lover, male, rich, cruel, told from the point of view of the child who loves it, who celebrates being the screwed one. Quote, he becomes rough, desperate. He throws himself on me, devours my childish breasts, shouts insults. I close my eyes on the intense pleasure. His hands are expert, marvelous, perfect. I'm very lucky, obviously. It's as if it were his profession, as if unwittingly he knew exactly what to do and what to say. He calls me a whore, a slut. He says I'm his only love, and that's what he ought to say. And what you do say when you just let go, sorry, when you just let things say themselves, when you let the body alone to seek and find and take what it likes. End quote. Internalizing the devaluation of self fundamental in being the shrewd one, the slut, the whore, celebrating it, not rebelling one bit. Female complicity does not even have the dignity or the insight of world class misogyny. For instance, Nietzsche, writing to Strindberg, quote, I read your tragedy twice with deep emotion. It was astounding me beyond measure to find a work in which my own conception of love, with war as its means, and the deathly hatred of the sexes as its fundamental law, is so magnificently expressed. End quote. The ones who hate women outright know they are waging war. The complicitous women, awed by the intensity of that war on top of and inside of their own bodies, celebrate being the screwed one. The misogynists are eloquent in condemning the rebels. Quote unquote emancipated women, wrote Strindberg, using the euphemism for feminists, quote, are like an army of whores and would be whores, professional whores with abnormal inclinations, end quote. The rebellion itself is the abnormal inclination pluralized by Strandberg's great hatred of rebel women. The complicitous women are flattered by the homage shouted during the fuck. Flattered or not, the homage is inevitable, an essential and defining element in identity and sexuality for women, a complement impossible to escape in a woman hating society where women are sex and dirt in one human body. The screwed one, quote unquote, passive, inert, and open. In the more humane and sophisticated view of Graham Greene, certainly, as compared with Nietzsche and Steinberg, sex with women in an early novel brought on, quote, a terror of life, of going on soiling himself and repenting and soiling himself again. There was, he felt, no escape, end quote. Having had sex, the fictional anti-hero, quote, longed with a ridiculous pathos for the mere physical purification of a bath, end quote. The woman, a kept woman, though not by him, tells him, quote, "Toward a day we are disgusted and disappointed and disillusioned and feel dirty all over. But we are clean again in a very short time, clean enough to go back and soil ourselves all over again." End quote. The self-disgust, feeling dirty, is an outcome of sex often marked on in literature. Being clean means being chaste. The character feels himself to be trapped in quote unquote slime. He has quote unquote wallowed. He feels quote unquote dirtier. Slime is used as a metaphor for corruption, but its meaning is literal too, not specifically in Graham Greene, though also in Graham Greene. The man is pulled down and in, the woman's sensuality being, in the words of the Bible, a narrow pit, a deep ditch. Quote, "How can he be clean that is born of a woman?" End quote. Job 4:4. Pudendum comes from the Latin pudere, quote unquote, to be ashamed. In Jewish and Islamic tradition, the word for uterus means grave. Quote, "The phrase, her grave is open, refers to the woman's body, and to the uterus in particular. According to early Muslim tradition, Muhammad made the following statement to Ali: a woman, when she gives birth, goes apart with the child. Her shame is open thus." And the expression grave for uterus occurs in the Mishnah and the Talmud. When a child is being born, the grave opens, that is to say, the womb of the mother opens. The grave begins to open when the woman is placed on the birth stool or when the blood begins to issue from her body. End quote. Inescapably, a woman's body incarnates shame, her genitals especially signifying dirt and death. Whether referred to in Playboy party jokes as gash or expanded on by Freud. Quote, "Probably, no male human being is spared the fright of castration at the sight of a female genital. Why some people become homosexual as a consequence of that impression, while others fend it off by creating a fetish and that great majority surmounted, we are frankly not able to explain." End quote. Just seeing those genitals turns a man gay or makes him rub up against rubber for a lifetime. To quote unquote surmount it, this great fear caused by these monstrous female genitals means to mount her successfully, unintimidated by the wound, her castration, the blood, the slime, the filth. Oh yes, wrote Freud to Jung, I forgot to say that menstrual blood must be counted as excrement. Women are also wittily rebuked for having filthy genitals. Restif de la Bretonne, who was famous in the 18th century for sophisticated literary pornography, not overtly sadistic but astonishingly condescending, wrote in one of his fictions, a priest giving advice to a new courtesan, quote, And most important of all, you must observe frequent ablutions in the torrid zone of your anatomy. A woman, like the rooms of a house in the city of Amsterdam, which are washed 3 or 4 times a day, must observe most careful hygiene in these parts. End quote. Amsterdam being frigid, not torrid, he has mixed his metaphors, or not. Sexologist C. A. Tripp, recently in vogue, finds a material basis for the pervasive and long-standing conviction that women are genitally dirty, quote-unquote, fish-like vaginal odors. Because of this stink, the belief that women are unclean, quote, has invaded one religion after another in the form of charges of defilement, end quote. Van de Velde, before him, found that, quote, extremely disgusting results occur when, owing to neglect of personal cleanliness where it is most needed, the natural local secretions become mixed with the products of urination, menstruation, and even excrement, end quote. For Yeats, quote, love has pitched his mansion in the house of excrement. Yeats, whatever, end quote. And Strindberg, his opposite, is in virtually every way too gynophobic to say what he meant, put the filth on the other end, quote, I could, I suppose, get girls, but where sex is concerned, I am an aristocrat. I demand that they use soap and a toothbrush. If I fuck once, I shall have to pay the slut 100-fold, and I don't want to sow my seed in bad soil, end quote. Vagina dentata is vivid in Strindberg's displacement to the mouth. The filth of a woman is a central conceit in culture, taken to be a fact, noted, remarked on, explicated, analyzed, poeticized, pornographized, satirized. Genital filth, menstrual filth, excremental filth, filth down there, between the legs, in the hole, the wound oozing blood and slime, dirt and smell, the dirt inherent in genitals or in her bad character. Wash, slut, wash. She is dirt, and what she touches is dirt because she contaminates, makes unclean. Her dirt is a contagious dirt, defiling whatever she touches. As Matilda Jocelyn Gage wrote in the 19th century, quote, everything connected with a woman was held to be unclean. It is stated that Agathro desired the sophist Herodes to get ready for him the next morning a vessel full of pure milk, that is to say, which had not been milked by the hands of a woman. But he perceived as soon as it was offered to him that it was not such as he desired, protesting that the scent of her hands, who had milked it off, offended his nostrils. End quote. This is a contaminating smell. It spreads like a disease, epidemic. Women, sexual lepers, the penis that could be there, rotted away by the disease of being women. A smelly, dirty gash, diseased, contagious. Men go there for sex, for love, believing it is a place of filth, finding it dirty and liking it dirty, wanting it dirty and needing it dirty. The dirt, the smell, bring on sex for the man, even if he has to force it on the woman. In The War at the End of the World, a novel about a fundamentalist revolution in the backlands of Brazil, Mario Vargas Llosa describes a rape. Quote, he smells the odor of her, and the thought dimly crosses his mind. It's the smell of a woman. His temples pound. With an effort, he raises one arm, puts it around Jurema's shoulders. He lets go of the revolver that he is still holding, and his fingers awkwardly smooth her ruffled hair. She begins struggling now to free herself from Gal's grasp, but he will not let her go. Jurema lashes out at him with both fists, scratching his face, kicks at him. End quote. The rapist, a political man of the idealist left, recognizes the rape as oppression, himself as the oppressor. He is deeply disturbed by having raped. Quote, it was that sudden, incomprehensible, irrepressible impulse that had made him rape Jurema after 10 years of not touching a woman that was troubling his sleep. End quote. The 10 years of chastity, the result of a vow made with a political comrade, quote, who could take his pleasure with a woman only by inflicting punishment on her, make love only when he saw a battered, bruised body. End quote. The friend used prostitutes, whom he brutalized. To stop the brutality, they made a pact that neither would touch a woman again, an oath of political brotherhood around sex, comprehended as oppression of the poor. Now, he himself had committed a violent rape, provoked by the smell of a woman, not the perfume of a lady, but the flesh smell of a woman. Her smell triggered the violence, foreshadowed the sex, announced the genital hidden from view, created for him the urgent necessity of penetration. In the 10 years he had not needed sex. Now he recognized that he needed rape. The oppressor needs to commit the oppression, not tepid consensual sex, but violent sex. The smell of the woman is in direct contact with her inferiority, her dirt in relation to his worth. As the oppressor, he expresses his need for her inferiority through rape. One endearing aspect of male supremacy is that while men are persistently traumatized by the filth of women, the wounded and dirty genitals, the dirty menstrual blood that, quote unquote, must be counted as excrement, women are supposed to have a good attitude, accepting, even rejoicing in, these vile anatomical inevitabilities that are herself. As Bruno Bettelheim wrote, typical of those who will make women accept these physical devaluations of self, quote, the ambivalence of the girl's feelings about her sex organs and about the lack of a penis has been repeatedly pointed out. Hope that a penis may be acquired in and through menstruation is an example of the positive aspect of this ambivalence. Many emotionally disturbed girls express its negative side by considering the penis horrible and ugly. End quote. It is fair to say that men are not ambivalent about her sex organs. There is, therefore, for them, no quote unquote negative side. They do not consider the penis quote unquote horrible and ugly. They are not quote unquote emotionally disturbed. No. The men are prick proud, having no gash envy, no filth envy, a lust for immersion in dirt, but no envy, no mental illness, no maladjustment that particularly sticks out. Women who are so emotionally disturbed that they have a political analysis of the ways in which the penis is used, ways often horrible and ugly, are not beaten back into line by the psychiatrists, but by the pornographers, as in the elegant rejoinder from Playboy. Quote, for the past decade, the penis has been getting a lot of bad press. One feminist wrote derisively, quote, we can stimulate ourselves or be stimulated by another woman as well as a man can stimulate us, because that unique male offering, the phallus, is of peripheral importance, or may even be irrelevant to our sexual satisfaction, end quote. Well, sit on my face, bitch, end quote. The man, despite the trauma and difficulty, immerses himself for love, for sex, for children, in this mixture of secretion, urine, blood, and shit. He does it not just for himself, but also for her, out of the most desperate sexual love. Example, Swinburne. Quote, he would have given his life for leave to touch her, his soul for a chance of dying crushed down under her feet. Deeply he desired to die by her, if that could be, and more deeply, if this could be, to destroy her. End quote. Or because she needs it. Example, Vandeveld, quote, it is significant that the clitoris, in common with the rest of female genital apparatus, only attains its full development and dimension with regular and constant sexual intercourse. End quote. The styles of love and health change, but never their imperatives. Submit, do it. The dirty women are supposed to keep doing it, and the brave men, attracted to filth, will keep going in, risking castration and death, or risking the simple paralysis of masculinity that can result from just seeing the mutilated genitals that are the woman. He has pride in his penis to pull him through. His semen is, quote, the strength of the body and its life and the light in the eyes, end quote, according to Maimonides. He can use semen to make her dirty, but it ennobles him, being the source of life, according to Aeschylus to Mailer. Quote, you may be holding back, end quote, the Playboy advisor says, quote, because you subconsciously think that coming in a woman's mouth is somehow dirty or wrong. You are absolutely right. That's what makes it so much fun, end quote. In some pornography, and in some sex murders, semen is spread all over the woman's face. A man or men ejaculate all over her body. In literary pornography, to ejaculate is to pollute the woman. Women's magazines sometimes recommend spreading semen on the face to enhance the complexion, pushing women to submit to a practice from pornography without any knowledge of its source or meaning. Getting women to accept semen and eroticize it in some regard by swallowing it or spreading it on oneself, while having it remain violatory of the woman for the man in sex, is the game plan, accomplished now through pornography and the collusion of women-hating women's magazines, and in the old days, not so long ago, accomplished through the sex manual advice of a medical doctor. Van de Velde wrote that, quote, the odor of semen is exciting and stimulating to women and unpleasant, even nauseating, to men, end quote. This gives semen its double-edged meaning and its intrinsic heterosexual power and significance. The possibilities of excitement for the woman and the simultaneous violation of the woman by the man are then explicated in a framework that appears on the surface to be moralistic. Quote, for a woman in coitus, the odor of the beloved man's semen is delightful and excites her anew, but that of an unloved mate fills her with loathing. End quote. Even in the time of ideal marriage, there were many unloved mates. The loathing she was filled with was literal, the loathing in form of semen driven into her to dirty her or make her more dirty or make her dirty by him. Freud connected the penis itself with feces, but not in a way that made the penis dirty, only evocative of an infantile sexual stage of development. Quote, a person's love of his own penis is not without an element of anal eroticism. End quote. The penis, as a hard, stick-like thing, evokes the hard, stick-like fecal mass in the rectum, and according to Freud, feces, baby, and penis are related in subconscious sexual meaning. It is true that etymologically, a baby and penis are related. The word penis comes from the Old English for fetus. Freud insisted on an important subconscious connection between these two phenomena and the turd in the rectum for this reason. Quote, the relationship between the penis and the passage lined with mucous membrane, which it fills and excites, already has its prototype in the pregenital anal sadistic phase. The fecal mass represents, as it were, the first penis, and the stimulated mucous membrane of the rectum represents that of the vagina. End quote. In other words, the mucous membrane that the man touches in intercourse with his penis, the vagina, is dirty like the rectum. The penis evokes the turd in the rectum because the man has the experience of touching a membrane just like the rectal wall. The relationship of the penis to the actual turd is evocative and symbolic, distant. The rectum and the vagina are analogues in present time. The vagina of the woman is not phenomenologically distinct from the mucous membrane of the rectum. For humans, the descent into the excremental is a descent into sadism and death. For women, being excremental is the dimension of inferiority that legitimates and makes appropriate sadistic sexual acts that pass as simple sex a cruelty in sex, the brutal domination through sexual subjugation of a worthless, essentially scatological thing. The sadism is part of the act of intercourse, or an adjunct to it. It is a cruelty of disregard and also a brutality of behavior. The descent into death is held to be synonymous with penile descent into the woman, which ends eventually and inevitably in detumescence. Buried in dirt, the penis strikes, then dies. Vagina comes from the Latin meaning scabbard or sheath. The penetration is implicitly conceptualized as cutting into a sadistic slicing entry through dirt into dirt. The penis is buried, fucks, dies. Quote, death is genitalized as a return to the womb, end quote, writes Norman O. Brown, always in celebration of the act. Coitus takes place in a quote-unquote womb cave, quote-unquote the grave. Fornication, he reminds us, comes from the word fornix, an underground arched vault. As it is, the fornix were literally underground, buried. Actually, in ancient Rome, prostitutes did business under the arched vaults through the city, arched bridges over primitive sewers, and fornication meant intercourse with the dirty women in dirty, hidden, secret places under the bridges that sheltered sewers. In the world of psychology, the ecstatic world of Brown, or the more tragic, even morbid world of Freud, the death connected with sex is held to be the death of the penis, trapped in the castration cave, the vagina. But in the world of real life, and in the subtextual worlds of Brown and Freud and nearly everyone else, men use the penis to deliver death to women who are literally, in their genitals, dirt to the men. The women are raped as adults or as children, prostituted, fucked, then murdered, then fucked. These violent degradations are not rare. They are so commonplace that the victims cannot be remembered from one day to the next. So commonplace that the victims remain nameless in a mass of ordinary names from ordinary places. In the normal world of everyday, regular culture, women are dirty. Brilliantly articulate men on street corners say so with unmatched eloquence. In the normal but hidden world of everyday, regular sexual exploitation of women as inferiors, the dirty women are sadistically abused because sex itself is used sadistically. Intercourse becomes a form of explicit sadism against women. In the heinous, abnormal world of prison and concentration camps, dirt, death, and sadism go wild, there being no limits on what men can do to women. Yet the elements of sadism, so extreme, so incomprehensible, we insist with bland and committed innocence, are not really recognizable. They mimic, with stunning cogency, the norms of disparagement and cruelty that constitute fucking male to female. The intensely cruel and ugly acts are not genuinely alien from ordinary practices and meanings. In Treblinka, one sadistic man, 20 years old, quote, slashed open the bellies of the women vertically with a sword, end quote. This while they were living. After the women disemboweled were pulled out of the gas chambers, prisoners were forced, quote, to mount and simulate the act of love, end quote. Vagina means sheath. Penetration was never meant to be kind. In pornography, scissors, razors, knives, and daggers are poised at the entrance of the vagina, cuts evident on the delicate skin of the pubic area, often shaved, or a sword penetrates the vagina. The woman smiles and smears the blood of her penetrated vagina all over her body. Eroticized dirt, eroticized sadism, eroticized death. Not in the concentration camp, but sold in a supermarket as mass entertainment, the evisceration happily simulated, or in a snuff film, real, or in a sex murder, real, the vagina not infrequently mutilated with a knife. Zola made clear in La Bête Humaine that one wanted to slice a woman open with scissors, quote, not because she was resisting him, oh no, it was for the enjoyment, because he wanted to, end quote. In painting after painting, speaking for the chingada, the screwed one, Frida Kahlo paints the woman vividly wounded, dripping blood. In one, A Few Small Nips, painted in 1935, a naked woman, except for one sock and one shoe, is on a bed, gashed all over. She is alive, wide-eyed, her body animated in curves and subtle, living contortion. A man stands upright next to the bed. He is fully dressed, even wearing a hat, and he holds a knife in his hand. He is aloof, indifferent, blank. The blood in blotches and smears all over her body and spreads out over the walls and over the floors in spots and smears over past the boundaries of the canvas to the frame. Callow shows the unspeakable pain of being alive and female, penetrated like this. Sadism and death under male supremacy converge at the vagina to open the woman up, go inside her, penis or knife. The poor little penis kills before it dies. Some classy men say that sex is connected to the awareness of death. They mean to suggest that sex takes place inside a context of human consciousness of the inevitability of death, that man fucks with the certain tragic knowledge of death, knowledge, intellection, and sensibility, all concocted by the awareness itself. Oh, all connoted by the awareness itself. They mean penile sex, human death. Vargas Llosa's rapist with a political conscience wonders, quote, would his penis get hard at the supreme moment, as was said to happen to men who drowned or were being beheaded? That belief, straight out of a horror show, concealed some torturous truth, some mysterious affinity between sex and the awareness of death. If such a thing did not exist, what had happened early this morning and what had happened a little while ago would not have occurred. Yes, it had been sniffing death close at hand, that had made him fall upon this woman and take her with his stiff penis twice in the same day. A strange relationship based on fear and semen and nothing else, he thought. End quote. Despite the high aspirations for quote unquote awareness of death, quote unquote torturous truth, and quote unquote mysterious affinity, he smelled her and raped her, twice now. He sniffed and raped, more dog like than human. Jorge Batil, a philosopher of the erotic and therefore a classy guy, likens what he calls quote unquote eroticism, classy sex, to dissolution or death. Quote, the passive female side is essentially the one that is dissolved as a separate entity, end quote. The whole essence of this classy sex, quote, is assenting to life up to the point of death, end quote. There have been two kinds of rebellion against this conflation of sex and death, this convergence of sadism and sex on the woman's body. In the realm of philosophy and politics, feminists have rebelled, often in a humane language that seeks to rescue sex and love from what Danish feminist Susanne Brogger called, quote, the traditional sadomasochistic humiliation ritual, end quote. Quote, only in death have European lovers ever been able to unite in any satisfactory manner. This is truly the damnation of the flesh, end quote. In the realm of real life, under conditions of atrocity or despair, some women have refused to surrender to the callous sex and death motif of behavior and belief that saturates so called civilization. As Primo Levi described in Surviving in Auschwitz, quote, all took leave from life in the manner which most situated them, some praying, some deliberately drunk, others lustfully intoxicated for the last time. But the mothers stayed up to prepare the food for the journey with tender care, and washed their children and packed the luggage. And at dawn the barbed wire was full of children's washing hung out in the wind to dry. Nor did they forget the diapers, the toys, the cushions, and the hundreds of other small things which mothers remember and which children always need. Would you not do the same? If you and your child were going to be killed tomorrow, would you not give him to eat today? End quote. Would you not do the same, philosophers of sex and death? Freud, Vargas Llosa Bati, Swinburne, Yeats, Nietzsche, Steinberg, Diego Rivera, Eldridge Cleaver, Sartre, Baldwin, Timmerman, Reich, Byron, Lawrence, Battleheim, too? Forgive me, would you not do the same? Have you ever done the same? Quote, "We could not stand women speaking the truth," end quote, wrote Joseph Conrad in a novel. Quote, "We could not bear it. It would cause infinite misery and bring about the most awful disturbances in this rather mediocre but still idealistic fool's paradise in which each of us lives his own little life. The unit in the great sum of existence, and they know it. They are merciful." End quote. Who would not do the same? Quote, "Here and now," end quote, wrote Bati. Quote, "I must emphasize that the female partner in eroticism was seen as the victim, the male as the sacrificer, both during the consummation, losing themselves in the continuity established by the first destructive act." End quote. He must emphasize. The imperative is to emphasize, not to do the same, to do the opposite, not to do the same, to have sex, which means creating a victim, not to do the same. Humans wound genitals in religious rites or for social or sexual reasons, for instance, the great tradition of male supremacy expressed in the scarification of the female body. Scarification of the female body. Adult male circumcision and subincision are frequently ordeals of manhood, tests of endurance undergone during ceremonies that usher in manhood in its most social and significant meaning. The marked phallus signifies the high status of the male adult. Infant females are circumcised, for instance, in Jewish rituals. Sorry, infant males are circumcised, for instance, in Jewish rituals and as a common hygienic practice in the West. There is female circumcision, clitoridectomy, and more egregious genital mutilation, labia fusion, and infibulation. Male and female genital mutilation are not analogous practices. For the male, the mark signifies a higher civil status. For the female, the mutilated genitals mean civil insignificance and sexual colonization. In the Freudian West, the female genitals per se are reckoned to be a wound, castrated, mutilated in themselves as God made them. The woman is born genetically mutilated, or genitally mutilated. In Hebrew tradition, male circumcision denotes a special bond between man and God, as described by Thomas Mann in Joseph and His Brothers. Quote, "It was the marriage command and appointed by God between man and the deity, performed upon that part of the flesh which seemed to form the focus of his being, and upon which every physical vow was taken. Many a man bore the name of God on his organ of generation, or wrote it there before he possessed a woman. The bond of faith with God was sexual in its nature, and thus, contracted with jealous Creator and Lord, insistent upon sole possession, it inflicted upon the human male a kind of civilizing weakness into the female. In other words, a female significance." End quote. In this interpretation, circumcision made the man to God, as the woman was to the man, incomplete, a little butchered. In Christianity, there is an incarnated God with a penis. According to Leo Steinberg, in his book on depictions of Christ's sexuality in paintings, the God with the male penis emphasizes the fragility of the human condition, the vulnerability of being human. Quote, "The sexual member exhibited by the Christ child, so far from asserting aggressive virility, concedes instead God's assumption of human weakness. It is an affirmation not of superior prowess, but of condescension to kinship, a sign of the Creator's self-abasement to his creature's condition." End quote. Christ's circumcised penis, quote, "is offered to immolation." End quote. In the contemporary Western world, Male circumcision is routinely done for so called hygienic reasons. The genital is wounded, mutilated, so that it will stay clean as it immerses itself obsessively in dirt. Female circumcision, which originated as did male circumcision in ancient Egypt, is now widely practiced in parts of Africa, but it has been used in modern America with a K, for instance, to quote unquote treat delinquent girls. The excision of the clitoris held to take away sexual drive and behavioral nonconformity. The circumcision of females, unlike the circumcision of males, destroys the capacity for sexual response, and infibulation, whatever its origins, constitutes a sadistic practice of mutilation on a civilly inferior class. Quote, so extensive is the infibulation operation, the clitoris is excised and the surrounding tissue scarified so that the fusion of the labia will occur during the healing, end quote, wrote Sarah Hardy, quote, approximately 9% of girls operated on under semi-modern conditions with some anesthesia suffer hemorrhage or shock. Infibulated women are partially cut open at marriage and must be fully opened at childbirth, after which they are sewn up again. End quote. The literal wounding of the genitals, including the circumcision of male infants, suggests human, not divine fury, a hatred of the self in sex passed on as a particular legacy, a human practice, expressing for male for the male a self-hatred and toward the female a genocidal loathing. The wounding is literal, yet it is also psychologically true. In sex, the act itself is often wounding, scarring, hurting, a jagged edge of pain and grief. Certainly, this is true often for women. As the first person narrator says in Joan Didion's novel, A Book of Common Prayer, quote, I recall once telling Charlotte about a village on the Orinoco where the female children were ritually cut on the inner thigh by their first sexual partner, the point being to scar the female with the male's totem. Charlotte saw nothing extraordinary in this. I mean, that's pretty much what happens everywhere, isn't it? She said. Somebody cuts you where it doesn't show. End quote. Surely, if humans, far and wide, wound the genitals, we hate them. We hate where they take us, what we do with them. This is not an equal hate, male and female, but a hate of male over female. The male so angered by the penis and what he thinks, feels, knows, it makes him do, penetrate the vagina, dirt, death, that he inflicts retribution on it, wounding it when he has the power, the civil power, not to prohibit any such wounding. In intercourse, he is, in the words of Marguerite Yourcena's Hadrian, quote, nailed to the beloved body like a slave to a cross, end quote. He wounds the genitals responsible, his own and hers. The men, as a body politic, have power over women and decide how women will suffer. Which sadistic acts against the bodies of women will be constructed to be normal? In the United States, incest is increasingly the sadism of choice. The intercourse itself, wounding the female child and socializing her to her female status. Early, perhaps, a sexual response to the political rebellion of adult women, a tyranny to destroy the potential for rebellion. Quote, I felt like I was being ripped up the middle of my legs all the way down to my throat, end quote, one incest victim said. Quote, I was sure that if I opened my eyes and looked down, I would be in two parts on the bed. End quote. This, too, is genital mutilation, with the penis doing the cutting. Perhaps incestuous rape is becoming a central paradigm for intercourse in our time. Women are supposed to be small and childlike in looks, in rights. Child prostitution keeps increasing in mass and in legitimacy. The children sexually used by a long chain of men fathers, uncles, grandfathers, brothers, pimps, pornographers, and the good citizens who are the consumers, the men who are, after all, just family, are supposed to slice up the middle, leaving us in parts on the bed.